Hello and welcome to Starbound's second channel. My name is Gabriel the Bibi Capaldi and I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please do check down below that you are subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free and helps us pop up on your feed a bit more often. Patrick V. Oswald, from lowly human kid to leader of the Galactic Council. This was the title of the best-selling biography of the modern galaxy. The words glowed on the terminal screen before Bayar, taunting him with their promise of what was surely going to be the most tedious reading assignment in the history of Fusarian education. His green hands felt impossibly heavy as they rested on the desk, the weight of his procrastination settling into his fingers like lead. The public library's climate control was the only noise around him, marking the passage of wasted minutes as he sat there, unable to bring himself to even open the book's first page. Bayar slumped further in his chair, his bald head reflecting the warm light that filtered down from the library's vaulted ceiling. His short, pointed ears itched with irritation as someone 2 terminals over began typing with unnecessary enthusiasm. The young Farsarian's skin, green from the crown of his smooth head to the tips of his fingers, seemed to darken a shade with his mood. Around him, the library stretched out in its modern glory, row upon row of sleek terminals like his own, each capable of accessing millions of digital texts. Physical books had become almost obsolete, relegated to special collections and nostalgic displays. Yet there, beside his terminal screen, sat one of those rare physical copies, the biography of Patrick Oswald, its cover depicting a smiling human against a backdrop of stars and the Galactic Council's spiraling emblem. The book seemed to mock him with its very presence. Why did his teacher insist on him reading the physical copy when the digital version was right there on his terminal? Some nonsense about appreciating the weight of history, or whatever pretentious reasoning Professor Kurlex had spouted while assigning this punishment. Bayar's fingers drummed against the desk as he stared at the book's spine, willing it to spontaneously combust, or perhaps develop the ability to read itself out loud. How, he thought bitterly, could the career path of some human be of any interest to me? The whole assignment reeked of his teacher's particular brand of educational torture. Just because he'd been disruptive in class, which really meant he'd pointed out the logical inconsistencies in Professor Kurlex's lecture on interspecies diplomatic protocols, he was now condemned to read about some human's rise to power, as if Bayar would ever find himself anywhere near a position of leadership. He couldn't even get elected to the Student Council's Waste Management Committee, let alone dream of galactic governance. His hand moved toward the book with all the enthusiasm of someone reaching for a live plasma coil. Each millimeter closer felt like a betrayal of his principles. Why should he care about this Patrick person? Humans had only been part of the Galactic Council for what, 60 standard years? Barely a blip in galactic history. And yet, here was their biography, printed on actual paper like it was some kind of sacred text. The book's cover was smooth and cool under his reluctant touch. Bayar's jaw clenched as he lifted it, the pages fanning slightly and releasing that peculiar scent of printed material, something between synthetic polymer and tradition. He set it down on the desk with more force than necessary, earning a disapproving look from an elderly Ketrian 3 tables away. Her 4 eyes narrowed at him before returning to her own terminal. "Just open it," he commanded himself. "Read the first chapter, write some generic analysis about leadership and perseverance, and move on with your life." His fingers found the edge of the cover. The book resisted slightly, as if it knew his reluctance and shared it. Or maybe that was just his imagination running wild in an attempt to avoid the task at hand. With a surge of determination that surprised even him, Bayar flipped open the cover and turned to the first page. The opening paragraphs were standard biographical far: birth date, home planet, early education. Bayar's eyes began to glaze over until a particular line made him blink and read again, then again. Patrick Oswald's journey to the apex of galactic governance began not with diplomatic training or political connections, but with his expulsion from New Geneva University on Earth at age 21 standard years. Bayar's eyes widened, the green of his face taking on a brighter hue as blood rushed to his cheeks. Expelled? He leaned closer to the page, certain he must have misread. The first human leader of the Galactic Council had been a dropout? It can't be, he muttered, earning another glare from the Ketrian. But Bayar barely noticed, his attention now riveted on the page. He read on, each sentence adding to his disbelief. Patrick hadn't joined the Galactic Council as an ambassador. He hadn't been a high-ranking bureaucrat or a diplomatic prodigy. He hadn't even finished his studies in political science. No, according to the biography, Patrick Oswald had taken the only job available to a young human with no credentials and a desire to leave Earth, model human specimen. Bayar sat back so abruptly his chair squeaked. Model human specimen? He'd never even heard of such a position. His fingers flew to his terminal, temporarily abandoning the book to search the Galactic Council's historical records. The search results populated quickly, and what he found made his jaw drop. Model specimen positions had been created in the early days of interspecies contact, designed to give established council species controlled exposure to newcomers. The role was exactly what it sounded like, sitting in a designated area while ambassadors and other officials observed, interacted with, and yes, even touched the specimen to better understand the new species' physical and behavioral characteristics. The terminal's description was clinical, but the comments and historical notes painted a clearer picture. Considered one of the most demeaning positions in council history, one annotation read. Lower status than asteroid mining due to the complete loss of personal autonomy and dignity. Specimens were required to remain passive unless directly asked to demonstrate specific behaviors or answer approved questions. Bayar's ears perked up with interest. This was the job that had launched Patrick Oswald's career? He grabbed the book again, his previous reluctance completely forgotten. The pages felt lighter now, almost eager to reveal their secrets as he found where he'd left off. The biography detailed Patrick's first days in the position with unflinching honesty. The human had been assigned to the council's central station, spending 8 hours a day in what was essentially a display room. Ambassadors would schedule viewings, entering to observe humanity's newest representative. The job paid barely enough to cover basic accommodations, and the rules were strict. Speak only when spoken to, move only when asked, never initiate contact, never ask questions. Patrick had broken every single one of those rules within his first week. Minutes passed like seconds, as Bayar devoured the pages. His earlier resistance to the assignment had completely evaporated, replaced by a burning curiosity. How did someone go from such a position to leading the entire Galactic Council? The more he read, the more puzzled he became. Then he reached a section that made him stop and shake his head in denial. The human was bad at his job? He said aloud, forgetting his library surroundings entirely. How could he have such a lowly position and still be bad at it? But the biography was unequivocal. Patrick Oswald hadn't just been bad at being a model specimen. He'd been historically terrible. The book detailed incident after incident, asking to examine the Thraxian ambassador's frontal appendages, engaging the Morvac delegate in a heated debate about economic theory, attempting to teach card games to a group of observing Epsilon scientists who had come to study human motor functions. He broke protocol constantly, firing back questions when he should have remained silent, initiating physical contact when he should have remained still. The biography quoted numerous complaints from that era, painting a picture of a human who seemed incapable of understanding his place. Within his first 2 years, Patrick had been formally reprimanded 10 times, and had come within a whisker of being fired and sent back to Earth on at least 6 separate occasions. Bayar found himself reaching for his terminal again, his fingers quickly interacting with the interface. There had to be footage from that time. The Galactic Council archived everything, and surely some record remained of this troublesome human specimen. The search took a few minutes, but eventually Bayar found what he was looking for. An interview from 53 years ago with Ambassador Zerath of the Zatarian delegation. The video quality was pristine, showing the blue-skinned Zatarian in sharp detail. His 2 long antennae moved crazily with agitation as he spoke, his 6-fingered hands gesturing emphatically.
"The human is impossible," Zerath declared in the video. "He acts as if the model specimen role is some kind of cultural exchange program, as if it's a two-way experience."
The interviewer, unseen behind the camera, prompted Zerath to elaborate.
"I scheduled a viewing to better understand human physiological responses to various stimuli,"
Zerath continued, his antennae now whipping back and forth.
"Standard protocol. I had a list of approved observations, but this Patrick creature wouldn't stop talking. He asked about my antennae, actually asked if he could touch them, as if he were the observer and I were the specimen."
Bayar found himself grinning despite himself. The Zatarian's outrage was almost comical in retrospect.
"And when I attempted to redirect him to the approved demonstration topics," Zerath went on, "he began asking about Zatarian hive structures, our molting cycles, our dietary requirements. He wouldn't shut up. I came to observe a human, not to be interrogated by one. The creature acted as if we were friends having a conversation."
The video ended with Zerath demanding Patrick's immediate termination. Bayar sat back, his mind racing. The Zatarian had been angry because Patrick had spoken to him, because he'd asked questions and shown curiosity about Zatarian culture. The complaint, framed as it was through decades of hindsight, seemed almost petty. But how had such a troublesome human ever become the leader of the Galactic Council? Bayar's mind struggled to bridge the gap between the protocol-breaking model specimen and the revered leader whose biography warranted physical printing. There had to be more to the story. He returned to the book, skipping ahead a few pages to find out what had become of Patrick's tumultuous tenure as a model specimen. What he found made him lean forward again, his eyes racing across the text. Patrick had lost his job, not for any of the formal reprimands, but for getting into a political debate with Ambassador Votor of the Visarian delegation. The biography described the incident in vivid detail. Votor, with typical Visarian arrogance, had been expounding on the natural hierarchy of species during what should have been a routine observation session. He'd placed his own insectoid race at the pinnacle of evolution, and relegated humans to somewhere near the bottom, calling them barely evolved primitive monkeys who had stumbled into space travel by accident. Most model specimens would have remained silent. Patrick had smiled. The biography was tactful about what exactly Patrick had said in response, noting only that it was a creative insult involving the ambassador's mother, his conception, a space worm, and something humans referred as the F-word. Whatever the exact words, they had been enough to end Patrick's career as a model specimen, immediately and irrevocably. "If he lost his job like that, then how?" Bayar muttered, turning the page eagerly. The answer surprised him yet again. Patrick might have lost his official position, but during his 2 years as a model specimen, he'd somehow built genuine friendships with numerous species. The very next day after his termination, he'd been hired as a personal assistant to Ambassador Grullick of the Hayav delegation. Bayar minimized the book and returned to his terminal, searching for information about this period. The results were fascinating. Videos and images showed Patrick and Grullick together at various council functions. The High-Av ambassador, with his distinctive frog-like appearance, moist green skin, large golden eyes, and a wide mouth, seemed to genuinely enjoy the humans' company. They were photographed sitting side by side at official gatherings, both often caught mid-laugh. Articles from that era dissected their unusual relationship. An unconventional partnership, read one headline. The hierarchy-breaking friendship between High-Av and human, read another. Commentators seemed baffled by Grullick's decision to hire a disgraced model specimen, especially one from a species as new and relatively primitive as humanity. But as Bayar dug deeper, the reasoning became clearer. The High-Av and the Visarians had been locked in political opposition for centuries. Their fundamental philosophies, the High-Av's emphasis on merit and adaptation versus the Visarians' rigid caste system, put them at constant odds. By hiring the human who had insulted Ambassador Votor, Grullick was making a statement that went far beyond simple employment. More fascinating still were the videos of Patrick from this period. The awkward model specimen had transformed into something else entirely, a charismatic presence who seemed to draw others into his orbit. One video showed him at a Galactic Council gala, surrounded by a diverse group of aliens, all leaning in to hear him speak. The caption mentioned he was performing something called stand-up comedy, a human art form he'd introduced to the galactic community. Bayar watched, mesmerized, as the human told stories that had a room full of different species, making their various sounds of amusement. Patrick had a gift for finding the universal absurdities in interspecies interactions, mining humor from the very cultural clashes that usually caused friction. He told a story about a Thraxian trying to shake hands with a Morvac, physically impossible given their respective anatomies, that had even the typically stoic Epsilon delegates emitting their strange laughter. The timeline of videos showed Patrick's influence growing. He'd appeared at more events, always at Grullick's side initially, but increasingly as a figure in his own right. Influential aliens began to gravitate towards him, not just the political outcasts and rebels, but established figures who seemed drawn to his irreverent charm and ability to bridge cultural gaps with humor and genuine curiosity. Then Bayar found the video that made his heart sink. News coverage of Ambassador Grullick's death. The High-Av had passed suddenly from a genetic condition common to his species, leaving behind a legacy of policies and, notably, a human protege, who was once again unemployed. The news reports from that time speculated about what would become of Patrick Oswald. Would he return to Earth? Would another delegation take pity on him? Bayar stared at the frozen frame of the news report, showing Patrick at Grullick's memorial service. The human's face was drawn with grief, an absolute contrast to the laughing figure from the gala videos. For the second time in his short career in the Galactic Council, Patrick Oswald was jobless and adrift. The young Farsarian realized he'd been holding his breath. He exhaled slowly, his mind racing with questions. How had this human, this dropout who couldn't even keep a job as a living display piece, how had he become the leader of the entire Galactic Council? Bayar's fingers trembled slightly as he flipped through several more pages of the biography, his green skin almost glowing with excitement under the library's warm lights. The story of Patrick Oswald had already taken so many unexpected turns, and he had the feeling the biggest surprises were yet to come. His eyes caught a section heading that made him pause. The ambassador that never was. Intrigued, Bayar settled back into his chair and began to read. The biography detailed how Patrick's growing popularity among non-human species had reached a tipping point. Several influential members of the Galactic Council had begun pushing for his official nomination as an ambassador for Earth. It made sense. No human had ever built such strong relationships across species lines. Patrick had become a bridge between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. someone who could represent Earth's interests while understanding the complex web of interspecies politics. But the nomination had failed spectacularly. Bayar leaned closer to the page, absorbing every detail. The human government on Earth had rejected Patrick's nomination almost immediately. The reasons were numerous and damning: his lack of formal education, his expulsion from university, his controversial reputation as a troublemaker, and perhaps, most significantly, his complete absence of connections within Earth's political establishment. The biography quoted one Earth official as saying, "Patrick Oswald may be popular at alien parties, but he's hardly the image we want representing humanity on the galactic stage." The young Farsarian felt a surge of indignation on Patrick's behalf. Here was someone who had done more for human-alien relations than any trained diplomat, and his own species had rejected him because he didn't fit their narrow idea of respectability. Unable to resist learning more, Bayar minimized the book again and searched for news coverage from that period. It didn't take long to find what he was looking for. A news segment from 48 years ago, showing Patrick leaving a meeting with Earth's diplomatic corps. The video made Bayar's heart clench. Patrick's face, usually so animated and full of life in the other videos, looked drawn and defeated. His shoulders slumped as he walked down the steps of the building, clearly having just received the news of his rejection. But then the camera panned wider, and Bayar saw something that made him sit up straighter. A group of aliens waited for Patrick outside, members of various species, all looking equally disappointed. There was a Thraxian with dimmed appendages, a Morvac whose tentacles drooped with dejection, two Hyav whose golden eyes had lost their usual sparkle, and even a young Epsilon whose body seemed to sag. They surrounded Patrick as he emerged, their body language expressing support and shared frustration, even across the vast differences in their anatomies. The human managed a weak smile for his friends, and one of the Hyav placed a webbed hand on his shoulder. No words were exchanged in the video, but the message was clear. Patrick might have been rejected by his own kind, but he had found a different sort of family among the stars. Bayar found himself wondering how Patrick had recovered from this setback. How did someone go from being rejected as an ambassador to becoming the leader of the entire Galactic Council? He grabbed the book again, skipping ahead several pages until a chapter title made him stop cold. "The most controversial political maneuver in galactic history?" His ears perked up with interest. This had to be important. Bayar dove into the chapter at once, his eyes racing across the pages as he absorbed the incredible story unfolding before him. The narrative was so engrossing that he barely noticed time passing, barely registered the subtle shift in the library's lighting as the day cycle progressed. Page after page revealed a political move so audacious, so completely unexpected, that when Bayar finally reached the chapter's conclusion, he couldn't contain himself. "A political marriage with another species?" he exclaimed loudly, his voice echoing through the quiet library. "What the hell is wrong with this human?" The reaction was immediate. The elderly Ketrian's 4 eyes swiveled toward him with disapproval. A pair of studying Epsilons paused their studies to emit warning cries. Even the enthusiastic typist from earlier stopped to stare. Bayar felt his green skin darken with embarrassment, but he was too shocked to offer an apology. Ignoring the continued stares and someone's whispered complaint about disruptive youth, Bayar turned back to his terminal. He had to know more about this marriage. His fingers were quick, pulling up every piece of information he could find from that period. The first thing he found was footage from a Lizarian royal gathering. The video showed Patrick and his group of alien friends arriving at the palace of the Lizarian queen. The Lizarians were a proud species, reptilian in appearance with scales that shifted between black and gold, depending on the light. Their matriarchal society was notoriously insular, and their queen, a widowed matriarch named Siskath, was known for her sharp intelligence and even sharper tongue. The video showed Patrick being granted an audience. ostensibly to perform one of his stand-up comedy routines for the Queen's amusement. Bayar watched, fascinated, as the human stood before the imposing Lizarian matriarch, who sat coiled on her throne, her long tail wrapped around its base like a golden black river. Her eyes, vertical slits of amber, watched Patrick with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. But Patrick didn't flinch. Instead, he launched into a routine about the sorry state of the Lizarian diplomatic team. The camera caught the shocked expressions of the Lizarian courtiers as Patrick joked about how their ambassadors spent more time arguing about proper scale polishing techniques than actually negotiating. How they'd once delayed a crucial trade agreement for 3 days because someone had used the wrong honorific for a minor functionary. For a moment, the throne room was deathly silent. Then, incredibly, Queen Siskarth's throat began to vibrate with the distinctive rattling that served as Lizarian laughter. Her golden black scales vibrated with amusement as Patrick continued, somehow walking the fine line between insulting and endearing. The video cut off there, but the next piece of footage Bayar found was even more shocking, a joint announcement from the following day. Queen Siskarth and Patrick Oswald stood side by, announcing their engagement and upcoming marriage. The Galactic reaction had been immediate and explosive. Bayar found hundreds of articles, opinion pieces, and analysis from that time. "Human marries into Lizarian royalty," screamed one headline. "The most unlikely alliance in galactic history," read another. The marriage wasn't just controversial, but it crossed species lines, though that was rare enough, but because it completely upended Patrick's political position. By marrying Queen Siskarth, Patrick became Lizarian royalty, and as her spouse, he was automatically granted the position of Lizarian ambassador to the Galactic Council, not representing Earth, who had rejected him, but representing his new people. The speculation about the nature of their relationship was endless. Many insisted it was purely political, a calculated move by both parties. The Queen gained a charismatic ambassador who could navigate the complex social dynamics of the Council, while Patrick finally got the official position he'd been denied. But Bayar found other footage that suggested something more. There were videos from various galas showing Patrick and Siskarth together. Despite their vastly different physiologies, they seemed to have developed a genuine friendship. In one video, they were spotted dancing, or rather, Patrick was dancing while Siskarth swayed her serpentine form in rhythm. Another showed them at a diplomatic dinner, Siskarth's head lowered so Patrick could whisper something in what passed for her ear. Bayar's heart was beating fast now. He could see it, the path that would lead Patrick to the presidency of the council, a human dropout who became Lizarian royalty, who turned rejection by his own species into an opportunity to represent another. It was brilliant, unconventional, and exactly the sort of move he'd come to expect from Patrick's story. Unable to wait any longer, Bayar returned to the biography, devouring the pages that described the years following the marriage. Patrick's role as Lizarian ambassador had been as disruptive as his previous positions, but far more effective. He brought a human perspective to Lizarian interests and Lizarian backing to his unconventional approaches. The biography detailed how he had negotiated trade agreements by hosting poker nights, resolved territorial disputes through stand-up comedy sessions where each side had to make jokes about their own positions, and once prevented a war by simply convincing both sides to sit for a drink. More importantly, his position finally forced Earth to take him seriously. The biography described how human officials, initially mortified by one of their own marrying into alien royalty, began to realize the incredible advantage Patrick's position offered. Through him, humanity gained unprecedented access to Lizarian technology and trade routes. The commercial ties between Earth and the Lizarian Empire flourished in ways no traditional diplomacy had achieved. But Patrick's greatest achievement was the coalition he built. The biography detailed how the informal friendship networks he'd cultivated over the years began to solidify into something more concrete. The High-Av, who had first given him a chance after his dismissal, joined the Lizarians and humanity to form an unlikely but effective voting bloc in the council. Bayar searched for more information about this faction and burst out laughing when he found what they'd been called the Misfit Coalition. The name had been coined by their opponents as an insult, referring to how the alliance consisted of the hierarchically fluid High-Av and the traditionally insular Lizarians, now represented by a human, and humanity itself, the newest and least established members of the galactic community. But Patrick had embraced the name, even printing badges with "Proud Misfit" for their supporters. The biography made it clear that initially the Misfit Coalition wasn't particularly influential. They were a minority bloc, often outvoted by the established powers like the Visarians and the Collective. Their proposals for reform were routinely dismissed, their attempts to modernize council procedures blocked at every turn. For several years, they were more of a social club than a political force, known more for their entertaining gatherings than their legislative achievements. Then came the Fifth Galactic War. Bayar's ears tensed as he read this section. He remembered studying the Fifth Galactic War in history class. It had been a brutal conflict against an external alliance of species that had refused to join the Galactic Council. But he'd never paid attention to the internal politics of the council during that time. Professor Kurlex had focused on the military campaigns, the battles won and lost, not the power struggles within the council itself. Now, through the lens of Patrick's biography, Bayar saw the war completely differently. When the external alliance attacked and destroyed the council colony on Area 44-2B, killing millions, the established council leadership had been paralyzed. The Trovian High Chancellor, representing one of the oldest and most powerful species in the council, had responded with half measures and bureaucratic delays. The biography painted a vivid picture of Patrick during this crisis. While the Trovian leadership dithered, Patrick and the Misfit Coalition had been relentless in their criticism. Videos from council sessions showed Patrick standing at the speaker's podium, his human features flushed with passion as he demanded decisive action. "While we debate who pays for damages, worlds burn," one transcript quoted him as saying. "While we follow procedures written centuries ago, billions die." The established powers had tried to silence him, to minimize the misfits as alarmists and inexperienced. But as the war progressed, and the council continued to lose ground, more species began to listen. The biography described how Patrick's speeches, broadcast across council space, began to resonate with populations who felt abandoned by their leadership. The breaking point came when the council's third fleet was destroyed at the Battle of the Silver Nebula. Bayar found footage from the emergency session that followed. The Trovian High Chancellor stood at the podium, trying to explain away the defeat as a strategic withdrawal, when Patrick had stood up from the Lizarian delegation seats. "Enough!" he'd shouted, and the word had echoed through the chamber. What followed was a vote of no confidence in the Trovian leadership. The biography described it as the most dramatic council session in centuries. Species after species stood to cast their votes, and when the count was finished, the Trovian dynasty that had led the council for over 200 years was ended. In the power vacuum that followed, the Misfit Coalition made their move. Patrick, backed by not just the Lizarians, but now also the High-Av, humanity, and the dozens of smaller species who had joined their cause, put himself forward as a candidate for council president. It was audacious, a human who'd been in galactic politics for less than 2 decades, seeking the highest office in known space. But in that moment of crisis, audacity was exactly what the council needed. The biography described the election in detail, how Patrick's unconventional approach and proven ability to build bridges across species lines suddenly seemed like exactly what the galaxy required. When the votes were counted, Patrick Oswald, the dropout, the failed model specimen, the troublemaker who married a Lizarian queen for power, became the first human president of the Galactic Council. Bayar sat back in his chair, his mind reeling. He knew from his history classes that the Council had won the Fifth Galactic War. Under Patrick's leadership, they'd turned the tide, forging a unified response that had driven back the external alliance. But seeing it from this angle, understanding the political maneuvering and personal journey that had led to that victory, gave him an entirely new perspective. He was about to dive back into the biography to read about Patrick's presidency when a thought struck him like a lightning bolt. His eyes widened as the pieces fell into place. Professor Curlix hadn't assigned him this book as a punishment. Bayard thought about his own behavior in class, how he constantly questioned authority, pointed out logical flaws in established thinking, disrupted the careful order of lessons with his observations. He'd thought Curlix had given him this assignment to bore him into submission, to make him read about some perfect leader as an example of what he should aspire to be. But Patrick wasn't a perfect leader. He was a disruptor, a troublemaker, someone who succeeded not despite his inability to follow rules, but because of it. The young Farsarian's green skin flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and something that might have been hope. Professor Curlix, who always seemed so frustrated with Bayard's disruptions, hadn't been punishing him. He'd been trying to tell him something, that being disruptive wasn't always a flaw. "You clever old educator," Bayard whispered, a smile spreading across his face. He wasn't a lost cause. He wasn't destined to be a failure just because he couldn't sit quietly and accept what he was told. He was just a misfit. And as Patrick Oswald had proven, sometimes misfits were exactly what the galaxy needed. Bayard looked down at the biography, still open to the chapter about Patrick's election. There was so much more to read. The war years, the reforms Patrick had implemented, how he'd transformed the Council from a bureaucratic nightmare into something that actually served its citizens. But for now, Bayard just sat there, feeling something shift inside him. He thought about tomorrow's class, about how he'd probably still point out the flaws in Professor Curlix's lectures. But now he understood that Curlix expected it, maybe even counted on it. For the first time since receiving the assignment, Bayard was genuinely excited to finish the biography, not because he had to, but because he wanted to see how Patrick's story ended. How did a misfit human drop out maintain power? How did he handle the responsibilities of leadership while staying true to his disruptive nature? The young Farsarian cracked his knuckles, his green fingers eager to turn more pages. He had a feeling the rest of Patrick Oswald's story would be just as unconventional as its beginning, and maybe, just maybe, it would give him some ideas for his own future. After all, if a human could go from model specimen to galactic leader by refusing to follow the rules, what might a disruptive Farsarian student accomplish?